One of the most important facets of any business is customer service. In business, you are not only selling a product or a service, but an experience. Providing exceptional customer service and developing real relationships with your clients means increased sales, retain customers, new customers via word of mouth, and a positive reputation. You're listening to the Focus on Customer Experience podcast. Benjamin Del Grosso gives you the ins and outs of one of the most underlooked aspects in business today. Improve your customer service and watch your business skyrocket. 2, 1. Now, here's your host, Benjamin Del Grosso.
Hello and welcome to the show. Today we have Doug Thorpe here today, and he actually is on a mission to help 10,000 managers and business owners become better bosses. Doug, why don't you give us a little introduction?
Yeah, Ben, thanks. As you said, I've launched a mission. My challenge for 2022 is to touch 10,000 managers, executives, business owners. It doesn't matter. There's a phrase, people join companies but quit bosses. And the exit data on the Great Resignation is telling us it's bad bosses, bad culture in companies that is a big contributor to people bailing out. So I want to start at the top. I want to talk to people that have that responsibility to lead a company. I want to help them become better leaders.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, people do. I've always said it too. People quit managers. They don't quit jobs.
Right.
I mean, well, you might quit a job, I guess, if you're not challenged, but let's be honest, that's a very, very small amount of people. Most people quit the managers, they quit the bosses, and retention's a very key thing. So what are some key things that maybe these managers need to do to keep their employees happy or change their management style?
Well, let me set that up with a little bit of a backstory. If you think about it, and probably anybody listening that's had management responsibility can relate to this, the way we pick managers for the most part is we have a supervisory job of some kind come open. We look around the team and we tap our best performer, the guy that's the best producer, or if it's sales, the best salesman, or if it's accounting, the smartest accountant. And we say, because you're good at performing your work, we think you could be the manager. And we put people into those positions and the struggle begins, right? They start trying to figure out what it means to be a manager. And maybe they've had a little mentoring, or maybe their mom or dad had some experience that shares with them, but the training and development at that very first entry point into the management chain is usually really weak. So the person flops around, struggles, sometimes gets burned out right away, other times figures it out. One of the ways they typically figure it out is, well, I just got to work harder. I just got to do more of what I did because that's why I got promoted. Well, they're not thinking about the people on the team. They're not thinking about those bright, shiny faces across the table from them. And they're still focused a lot on the work. So you get this work performance mindset built up. And for job manager, job number 2, that's kind of what burns you out even more, because what have you done? You've taken on your work plus helping everybody else do their work better. And you're not really leading, you're just solving a bunch of problems. So part of what I do, I'm going to jump, way ahead
that's awesome.
in the discussion here. What I try to do is help people think about what it means to really be a leader and talk about some of the core principles and the big difference between management and leadership. And it is huge. So we've got to agree that there is a difference and there is a thing, and becoming a leader can be and will be just as valuable to the company as being a producer might be. And that's really true for the entrepreneur who's grown his business up to a certain size and now has had to add all these people. If you haven't made the pivot from doer, founder, manager to leader of this enterprise, your company's going to hit an invisible wall. You're just going to smash into it like you're going 60 miles an hour. And I've seen it. I was a banker for 20 years and I watched owners do that, just absolutely destruct with, when you look at paper, they've got success. You know, they've gone from 0 to 1 million annual, 5 million annual, 10 million, and all of a sudden the company just implodes. And you scratch your head and go, what the heck happened? Well, when you really do the full deep dive, that owner didn't make the pivot, didn't make the change, was still insisting that everything come across their desk, became a huge bottleneck for the company, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole lot more that goes with that.
Yeah, that's true. So to kind of go back to some of the points there, I'm just going to bring up an example. So when I used to work at Best Buy back in the day, and many places in retail early on, the top sales guy always got promoted to manager.
Oh yeah.
And then you always watch that department, like sales would still be the same because that person is now the manager, but that person's whole thinking or mindset is, I just need to keep doing, like you said earlier, I need to keep doing what I'm doing, instead of pivoting and changing and going, okay. And the manager who promoted them saying, hey, you know what we need you to do is train your team to do what you do and lead them and motivate them and show them how to get to the next level. Right. And I use the example from Best Buy. And the reason why I do is because there was a guy, he was the top salesman. He went into the department. He ran it, and 6 months in, the whole department tanked. And I was in car audio, and they were labeling me as, you only know about car audio. Someone needs to manage the department. I said, no, I know how to manage people. Like, put me in there if you don't think I can do it. I can manage people. I went in that department. It was home theater. It wasn't really 100% up to speed on everything going on in home audio that day. But what I did was, first thing I did, I called all the top performing stores in the Best Buy chain, called the top 3, all the top results. I asked them what they want to do, basically quizzed them. They told me what they were doing. Then what I did is I took the team, took the top people, and I said, hey, this is what you need to do. This is what these guys are doing. And the thing is it really hurt a lot of these guys' egos because they wanted to sell the big 65-inch TV and they wanted to have the $5,000 sale. But what I did is I took the top performers and put them and sold them in the 27 and 32 and 40-inch TVs. Because why? Because that's what the average household buys. So you're maximizing your sales, the accessories and everything, all being in that. And then I'd rotate the top performers into the big TVs. And because of that department, we went from 35 in the company to top 3 and number 1 net profit in the company within 3 months for the year. And this is all just from managing. Yeah. So I can speak 100% because I've fully experienced and been in that, but I'll hand it over to you there, Doug.
No, you're right. And that is the thing that does work, that a high producer that gets picked to be the manager or team leader, if the management above them says, look, your mission is to teach this team how you do what you do, show them, model for them, you be their mentor doing what you do, because we agree you perform at a high level. And that's where the breakdown often happens. That communication of specific expectation about truly leading and developing the team is not made. It's just kind of a implied or assumed, or depending on the size of the company, that manager right above that made that pick to put the person in a first line supervisory job, they themselves don't know that. They didn't figure that out when they were sitting there. So they're just continuing to turn the crank. To go back to my point about the difference between management and leadership, I use a simple phrase. Management is about process, leadership is about people. And I've seen good managers make a whole career, 20, 30, 40 years managing things. And yeah, they hit budget goals and they turn numbers and all that. But when you really dig into those stories, usually the people story is ugly. There's been turnover, no loyalty, there's no retention. The longest tenured employee is maybe 3 years if you're lucky, but you look at somebody that grabbed the leadership idea and really locked into that. What you hear about is a team where somebody's been there for 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, and they're loyal, they're committed, and yes, they turn the numbers. So there is a really big leadership gap. And speaking to the entrepreneurs, when you've got your great inspiration to go start a company, all I say is bravo to you, go do it. However, you have to understand that at some point you're going to have to make that decision. Can I learn or do I know how to lead this team I'm going to build? And I might be a great technologist, I might be a great engineer, scientist, whatever the idea is. But if you can't build a team to help scale and replicate and grow that thing, that idea that you had, again, you're going to hit an invisible wall.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I join a lot of networking groups and always try and learn from other people on a consistent basis. But I think that's awesome. I've never heard anybody split it up like you did, management and leadership. I guess I've always just assumed that it was a package, but I guess the way you're explaining it is it's two different things. And I totally agree with you because I've seen a lot of people that are good at managing the numbers, but they're not good at managing the people. So they look at everything as, nope, that person needs to work 9 to 5 and this person needs to be this. So they always make sure somebody's there, but then they usually end up having huge rotation because they're not actually leading the people. They're not taking care of the people. They don't have high retention. I've learned from a lot of my mistakes over the years. So I've always managed to have very good retention. However, I mean, I'm not going to say some people definitely have slipped through the cracks. Not everybody's going to stay with you forever, but yeah, no, it's just very interesting. A lot of this stuff definitely reminds me of all my big box stuff that we're talking about here.
Oh, yeah.
Just because, it was a revolving door when you're working big box. Every 3 months you had a new person. So the whole process had to be sped up to train these people. But at the same time, we had a lot of seasonal people. You had a lot of part-time people, which is different. I mean, now having a small business, having an employee, you want them full time, you want them to be here, you want them to be part of your vision, and you want them to move forward with you, right?
Right, right. Well, it's especially critical in the small business world where, the founder comes in with an idea. It all starts with an idea, right? You see a niche, you see a gap in a market, you say, I've got a solution for that. I can fill that gap. I can make that change. So you start building this little engine that could, right? So, and maybe you have a good run. Maybe you're 1 year, 2 year without hardly ever hiring anybody. You can do the marketing, you can do the delivery, you can get it done, and that's great. But eventually, if you're really going to scale the business, you have to bite the bullet and start hiring people. And the first thing most entrepreneurs complain about is, yeah, but they don't get my vision. They don't understand what I'm trying to do here. Well, teach them, show them, tell them, build the fire. I just released an article this morning in my blog called "Who Lights Your Fire," and it's about the idea. There's a great phrase that says, um, "Teaching is not about filling a pail; it's about lighting a fire." And you can dump teaching and training and development into somebody, but if they don't catch that fire of what you're doing, that fire that you've got, you're not leading them. You're just doing the process again. And leadership helps spark that fire. It helps them get excited about what you want to do. And, you can talk about ways to motivate people, profit share and bonuses and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
But even that's a surface level event. You got to get in their hearts and minds. There's another phrase I use, and this sounds like coach speak, but it's harness the power of your mind's attention and your heart's affection. So if you as a leader can look at your team and go one by one and say, the guy gets it in his head, but he doesn't have it in his heart. So let's work on that. Let's help that, or vice versa. Guy's passionate about what I'm doing here. That's great, but man, he can't understand the details. He's missing. Maybe he's missing a step in the assembly or whatever it is you're doing. Again, focus on that. Don't throw them out, but focus and know that as the leader, that's what you have to work on to help couple that together: mind's attention and heart's affection.
I don't know what it is. I just had like an epiphany here, but I was just thinking about how when I would work in a lot of these big box stores and the top salesperson would get moved up. And it's very similar to a small business. And actually, there's no difference, but I don't know. I was just thinking about it, right? And how the salesman moves up. He's the top salesman. He's now the manager of the store. So he keeps selling and he wants to be the number one producer instead of passing it on. And you were talking about, a small business owner, he's doing the marketing, he's doing everything, right? And sooner or later, you have to pass it on. One thing, you're going to end up getting burned out sooner or later. Two, you need to delegate because the company can't ever grow, because otherwise you just created yourself a good job and you're just working in the business instead of working on the business, right? So I was just thinking about, all these companies where somebody is, and if they thought like an entrepreneur when they got promoted as a salesman to a manager, for instance, of a store, and just started thinking about, hey, what do I need to delegate from my current duties that I used to do? And how do I need to focus on training all these people underneath me? Because if I train them, I won't have to do that. And then I can focus on growing the business.
Right.
Right. And it was just interesting because I never really thought of big box retail as like an entrepreneur. But really, when that salesman gets promoted, that's really what he has to do, is think like an entrepreneur and how to delegate all of his duties that he used to do over to other people.
Yeah. And on that point about training them to do what they need to do, there's I call it a myth or a lie or straight from the pit of hell. I don't know what you want to call it, but the mindset that manager gets into is, well, it's just easier to do it myself. I'm going to just do it myself. Somebody brings you a problem and you go, oh, here, let me do it, And I hear that, and that's often an entry point when I do coaching relationships with people. That's kind of one of the main things, a symptom that's going on. And I'll tell them, I go, well, for the moment, that may be true. I'm going to give you that. For that instant, that may be true. But how many more times are you going to keep doing that? Let's accumulate that time over time, and let's look at how efficient you are now that you're taking on everybody else's problems and you're solving them without really developing them to solve their own problem. And that's when I get into, there's a phrase I've often challenged my clients with. There'll be a situation, and by the way, I do a lot of my coaching on what I consider presence-based activity. What's your problem right now? Let's look at that and let's deal with how you're addressing it. I'll ask them, are you solving a problem or are you leading? And they'll go, the first time I ask them that, and I'll say, well, yes, at the end of the day, the problem's got to get solved. But how are you going to do that for the benefit, the long-term benefit of the team? You've got to lead the people. And if nothing more, you lead them through the thought process that you use to solve that problem. If you're a problem solver, you have a process in your mind. You have a waterfall of thinking. And, it's like, okay, let's start up here. What's wrong with this? Yes or no? Okay, now we're going down here. Yes or no? Now we're going over here. Yes or no? And you have that process in your mind. And if you're obviously if you're experienced and really good at it, you've done it 1,000 times. It's like muscle memory for an athlete. It just boom, there's your answer. Well, still there's that process that you used. So that's what you have to teach your people if you want to multiply and scale the business. You have
Hmm.
to show them that process. And a big part of delegating is get comfortable with allowing them to fail a time or two up front.
Oh yeah, I mean that's what we do with kids every day. Kids make mistakes every single day. Kids are going to fall, even though you're scared. Are they going to fall and get hurt? If you don't let them fall and get hurt, they're never going to learn. They're never going to
That's right.
grow.
That's
And it's the
right.
same thing that you need to do with your employees. And I wanted to bring up a point, something that really uh, was a good memory. So good managers that I have worked for have always pushed me to come to me with a solution, not a problem. Right. So come to me and say, hey, there's a problem here with this. This is what I think we should do in order to correct it.
Yep.
And then, because a lot of them are looking for like being reaffirmed that you are making the right decision. Go ahead, do it if that's what you think it needs to be done. But what happens is over time is if you're always telling them no, that's stupid, it's wrong, and you're not a good leader, people just come to you and go, hey, we have a problem here, and they want you to solve everything for them.
That's right.
So I'm always very big on, you want to empower your employees, and we're talking about, leadership. You really need to make sure to empower them, because if you do empower them to make their own choices, if they do make a really bad decision every now and then, that's all part of, coaching them or retraining them on, hey, listen, let's look at this. You made a decision. It was a wrong one, but guess what? Let's look at that. Let's learn from it and let's move forward.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's interesting you brought up the parenting thing. When we talk about delegation, I actually use that. And what's the real core of what a parent's doing with bringing up their child? It's permission and protection. I give you permission to try that thing. Okay, little child, okay, go ahead and walk across the street. I give you permission to do that. I've taught you, look both ways, do everything. Are any cars coming? No. Okay. And again, that's that little process, that mental process we're teaching, look both ways. Do you see anything? Okay. No. Now go. Well, that's permission, but you also give them protection. If they get across the street and get stuck or afraid or whatever, you go get them, you bring them back, and you're protecting them. You're not belittling them or ranting on them. You're comforting them. Okay, you tried. To apply that to business, I know a situation. I'm not going to name names of the company, but there were a lot of zeros in the value of the transaction we're talking about here. Okay, so they were trying to build a whole new department that was involved in intraday activity where these transactions were flying back and forth, call them buy and sell type transactions. It wasn't anyway. But one of the first things one of the employees did, he busted a deal and it was 50 million bucks. I mean, it's like, you would, most businesses, the good fortune in this business, it was so big. It's a global leader in their field. 50 million was just one transaction among probably 20 $50 million deals that day. So yes, one went bad, but 18 or 19 were okay. So you've got all these gains over here and there's one loss. Well, you can't dwell on that one loss. You've got to keep it in perspective. And while looking at the one transaction and the size of the dollars, you say, oh my God, that's a lot of money. Yeah, it was. But in perspective to what the business was doing, it's not much different than you're selling a $20 item out of your store. You sell 100 of them a day, but 3 of them are bad, or somebody walks off with one because an employee wasn't looking the way they were supposed to. Okay, it happens. It's a cost of business, right?
Yeah. No, yeah, it definitely makes sense. I was listening to a podcast not too long ago where they were talking about how this guy wrote in, said he had an employee, made a huge mistake, cost the company an exorbitant amount of money. But the guy's been with him over 10 years, never had a major mistake ever. I'm thinking about firing him. And they, saying, what do you think? And I figured, the podcast would do the whole like, well, yeah, of course I would fire him. If it's going to cost you, like $1 million or you lost a big deal, you should get rid of him. Because typically in business, that's the way I always feel a lot of people think they gauge everything on sales. But I was really happy with the answer that the guy gave, because he said, well, if the guy's been there like over 10 years and he's a good employee, doesn't have any major issues at all, well, why would you? The cost to train a new employee is going to cost you probably whatever that transaction was worth. On top of it, to get them up to speed, you're going to have a dip in sales now, probably over the next 3 to 6 months while you train. Never mind the fact, what was the last thing was that mistake that happened will probably happen again with the new employee 5 or 10 years down the road. So you're better to just take it, use it as a learning opportunity to train all your staff, because guess what? That mistake probably won't happen again. And one last point, because you were talking about how it's like a $50 million transaction. So I've always, when I was managing a retail store, I always would have a few people always say to me, we have to take care of this customer. He spent $20,000 with us. We have to take care of this customer. He spent $25,000 with us. And I was like, so the customer spent $500 with us is less important than the one who spent $20,000 with us. So I always feel that every customer should be treated the same, whether they spend $500 or whether they spend $25,000 or $1 million or whatever it is, right? But that's my opinion. I just feel everyone should be treated the same. We shouldn't put them up on a different level. Although you might have to give some extra service to the people who buy more, but
yeah, yeah. Well, the question of that 10-year guy that made a mistake finally after 10 years, there is one argument in that is that, okay, people are human, stuff happens.
Yeah.
And I always also encourage leaders to think about the fact that your people on your team don't show up for work the same way every day. What do I mean by that? What I mean is there's this thing called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Are you familiar with it?
I've heard of it before, but I don't remember.
Well, it's a really old teaching. I learned it in business school, many, many years ago. It is a pyramid, and it says basically our very first need is safety and survival. We're a species, we're an animal on this planet. We have safety and survival as our first basic need. So, okay, if you're safe, warm, dry, well fed, you've got that satisfied. Now you move up a notch. You've got to belong to a community. There's a belonging element at the next level. And then it goes on up 3 or 4 more levels that get into finally, and a lot of people call these different things, but at the top, it's this idea of self-actualization. I'm into the game. I feel fulfilled. I'm empowered, etc. Well, as you move employees up and down, or I'm sorry, as employees show up for work, they're flying up and down that scale every day. And as an example, Bob shows up for work and he's in a real funk, and you pull him off to the side. You got a good relationship with Bob. You go, Bob, what's going on, man? You don't seem like yourself. And he says, oh man, the wife and I had this fight going out the door this morning. She just busted my chops. Well, he fell back down that rung. He had that emotional eruption in his personal life. So it's on his mind. Maybe his gut's all balled up. His breakfast isn't sitting well. He's got all that going on, and now you want him to go to work, and it's like, oh, okay, Bob. I tell you what, why don't you take an extra 15? Go get a cup of coffee. Walk around the block. Let's see if you can, kind of process this stuff let's don't worry about focus on work. Just, go get your head straight, back to what I said, mind's attention, heart's affection. When you're in that lower rung of the Maslow's hierarchy, you're worrying about survival. You just had your chops busted by the wife, and now you've got to you got to question your own survival. What's dinner going to be like when I get home? And you got to get past all that. So the art of being a good leader is to know your team and be sensitive to that. Don't be condemning. And I know there's going to be somebody in the audience that's sitting there going, Doug is full of crap. I don't have time to do all that with my guys.
I just brought it up here, the
There you
Maslow's
go.
hierarchy of needs. So yeah, I was looking at it because I would say I find myself in the self-actualization phase. I found that myself in there a lot where I wanted to be the most that I could be, and I felt the company wouldn't offer me anymore. And
Right.
that's where I got to the point where it's like, but I want more training. I want more things. I would end up leaving those
Right.
companies to search for that next big thing, right? Or the next challenge, the next
Right.
thing, right?
Right.
But I mean, I felt like I always left the family behind. Like I always had, 15 or so employees or whatever that'd be working for me. And I felt like I left that family of employees behind, but it felt like that's what I needed to be. I needed to be something more. I needed another challenge. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, this
Yeah.
is pretty cool. I think I've seen this before, but yeah, I've definitely, yeah, no, that's awesome.
Well, different people teach that slightly different ways. They use different terminology for it, but the principle's the same. The point is that base level, you're into your sort of animal instincts of, am I safe? Do I need to fight this out with somebody? Am I going to survive the day? And you can't get good work out of people when you're doing that. I interviewed a guy on my podcast that was a brain scientist,
Oh,
and
wow.
he told me that when everybody's familiar with the famous fight or flight mode, you get threatened, you're gonna, either fight it out or you're gonna run, right? Well, your brain is wired that when that kicks in, it's another part of your sensory system. When that kicks in, all the blood flow in the frontal lobes goes elsewhere because you need energy in your brain to do the fight or flight thing. Well, the frontal part of your brain is where all your logic and your intuitive processing goes on. So your work happens in the front part of your brain. And so all these things you got to do while you're busy at work happen up there. Well, if you don't have any blood flow there, guess what? That's shut down. And so you got the guy, Bob comes to work, he's in a fight or flight mode. If you as a leader don't recognize that and give him a moment to somehow try to process that and calm down, gets focused, gets centered, you are literally allowing him to get blood flow back to the part of the brain that's going to want him or help him contribute to your work. Why would you not allow that to happen? Why would you insist, Bob, I don't care what happened with Margaret, you got to get busy. We got to get this order out. It's got to go now. Well, Bob's going to put the wrong label on it. He's going to put the wrong parts in the box. The whole thing's going to.
Oh, no, I totally agree 100% because I would have a sales guy and I would notice his numbers would slip off and I'd let him go for maybe a couple days, see what's going on. And depending on what was happening, right? If I noticed he was really off or she was really off, I'd bring him in the office and find out like, hey, what's going on, right? And it's interesting that little conversation of what's going on. Sometimes people won't even tell you what's actually happening. But I've
Right.
had people where literally just break down and start crying. Someone died close to them, or something happened that they don't even really want to talk about, and you just have all these things that spill out in that room. And then a lot of times once they've gotten it off their chest, it's like boom, they go on and they're performing again, right?
Yep.
And it's
Yep.
Or sometimes it's been they're just mad at me, something I said, didn't even think much about it, like I talked about on another podcast, the other one I filmed the other day about communication, how I told my wife one day that I was disappointed in her, and I just said it. And I didn't think it was a big deal, but when I said it, I was like, whoa, I didn't even realize, like, I wasn't even thinking about the meaning. It was just like the first word that came into my mind, and it was just a really terrible experience. But you do that to an employee, and all of a sudden they lose motivation. And sometimes it can be you as a leader. You could be the best leader in the world. We're still all going to make mistakes.
Right. That's
You
right.
know?
That's right. And if that message, that quick little statement that just sort of spun off, it does have an impact. And it's funny you bring that up. I have a whole deal about communication that I train my clients that, you know, communication is not a two-way street. It's a 4-part exercise. And if you don't, as a leader, if you don't effectively get all 4 parts working, you're not going to have good communication. And I can get into that real quick. The first thing is the thought you've got. What is it you're thinking? What is it you're trying to get out there? The second part is what you say or how you write it, whatever your method of communication is, verbal, written, whatever. And how many times have we all said, oh, that didn't come out the way I was thinking about it, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's an example of that. You had the thought, it was a great thought, and then when you tried to put it in words, it just didn't work. So that's 1 and 2. The third part is the other person, the way they receive it. And the common phrase is, it got lost in translation, so it's that two-way, the physical exchange of the person receiving it. But then there's a real critical fourth part, and that is once they've taken it in, how are they processing it? To use your example with your wife, bad choice of words, yes. Hoping it didn't land with a lot of weight, but apparently I'm inferring from your story it did.
Oh, yeah.
With a lot of weight.
I was in trouble.
That was her processing. That was her processing, saying, oh, and so as a leader, you have to be sensitive to all of those things, starting with, you got your thought, that's great. You put it out there, it didn't land quite right. Let me rephrase. Let me pull that back. Let me go again at it. But then you have to pay attention to how people are receiving it. And the most classic way is, team leaders tend to get their team together and they're all standing in the shop or sitting around a table or whatever, and you're making these announcements as the leader. Well, read the room. When these messages are landing, check everybody's pulse. Look at the body language. Look at who's receiving it, who's recoiling, who's going, God, here we go again. Whatever the body language tells you, make a note of that. You might have to follow up offline with that person, to say, hey, man, when I made that announcement, you seem to really have a problem with it. Talk to me. What's going on? But the fourth one is a little harder to detect. And that is, as they're processing, what actions get manifested in the way they behave after now you've had your communication. Do they storm out of your office? Do you hear them throwing things in the back room?
Oh.
How is the processing going?
I manage technicians, so believe me, I've seen a few things fly.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been there and done that too.
They get very, there's very big egos in the mechanic and technician world, right? That they do the best work and everybody else does, subpar work, and we do the best. So it's a very hard type of person to manage, right? Because if they feel, such and such XYZ does a terrible job compared to me, and then you catch them doing something wrong, you've completely wounded their ego, and then they go on the full defense, right? Because they're not
Right.
managing, they're just more on defense of, yeah, but blah blah blah, this person does a bad job, right? So but yeah, I've definitely seen some things go flying over the years. Not gonna lie. Nothing at my head, luckily.
It happens. Well, I reflect on my early years as an Army officer, and people were walking around with guns in their hands, so you have to
Tread
be careful.
lightly.
You have to be careful, right?
Oh no, yeah, do you have any, I don't know, final words or final thoughts of wisdom or?
Well, I guess, based on everything we've covered today, the big message is if you're the owner of a business or you're managing a department or a team in a bigger company of some sort, grab onto this idea there is a big difference between management and leadership. And if you haven't begun a serious process for yourself to dive into the theme of becoming a better leader, uh, no time like the present. Today's a great day to start on that journey. And I certainly am happy to talk with people. And when you go to my website at dougthorpe.com, there is a block there for a discovery call. I still offer courtesy calls, no charge for the discovery. We can have a talk about where you are right now in your process. I'd be happy to give you some tips and ideas and look at ways that we can get you on that journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so they can get a hold of you on dougthorpe.com. You also have a podcast.
Right. The podcast title is Leadership Powered by Common Sense. And my format is real similar to what you're doing here, Ben. It's just an open discussion with some great guests, and we tackle all kinds of ideas and things that are out there in the business world. It all ultimately does come back to that central theme of being a better leader. But there's another implied message in that title, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I think in today's world, people try to make things too darn complicated. There's often some common sense solutions that can be found. That, of course, immediately leads into the debate. Some say that common sense is a rare commodity nowadays, and that might be true as well. But you can look for the simplicity in things, and oftentimes the simplest solution is really your best solution.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, I've never actually thought about leadership and management as two different things. So this definitely has the clock ticking, it just makes me think a little bit differently. And I guess that's why I like having these discussions with, business leaders like yourself, because you're always going to learn something new. And, I always want to learn something new every day. I mean, and sometimes I learn from making mistakes.
Well, I'm
So,
going to tell you a real quick story. I years ago, when I was thinking about setting up my coaching practice, I have a real good friend who's a seasoned CEO. He's a workout guy. He's been hired by multiple private equity and venture capital firms to go in as the parachute CEO and turn a company around and get it ready for being liquidated. And great guy, phenomenal leader. I was sitting talking to him and I was telling him kind of what I'm thinking about, my passion for leadership. And he laughed. He said, Doug, you're never going to be able to sell leadership. I said, what? He said, I'm going to venture, in my humble experience, I think only 5% of the CEOs in America really understand leadership as a specialty. He said they've probably been to some workshops, they've probably done some programs, and they've been through thousands of slide deck pages about leadership, but they don't really think of it as a toolkit they need to bring to work every day. And they definitely are not going to be hit cold turkey with the notion of buying or paying for a leadership development exercise. I said, "Are you sure? 5%?" He goes, "I promise you." He said, "It's going to be steep." So I've actually found that to be true. I don't know the exact numbers, but I do know that when I do my own marketing for my business, I do call myself a business advisor and executive coach. I'll start with the business advisory work. I mean, I need to help you make some more money today. I get that, and that is what you're about. As we do that, though, I can help you see the value of making this look at leadership as the long-term answer for what you need to be doing.
I agree with that. Leadership definitely is the long-term answer, especially if you want employees that are going to be raving for you. They're going to be disciples preaching, your message to the customers, right?
That's right.
They're going to follow your vision, right? So that's why these people are here. They're following you. You're the leader. And
Right.
so I totally agree with it, because managers, you can manage people and rotate through the door, but leaders, if you can keep people retained for 10, 20 years, I just think about, you have that plumber that comes to the house and, he's in his 50s or 60s and he comes in and goes, yep, it's this, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And he fixes it in like 10 minutes. And then some other, new recruit, he's 20s, 30s, comes in and he's struggling it for 2 or 3 hours trying to figure out, because he doesn't have the experience. Right. And maybe that's a bad example of leadership, but I just think about that knowledge that you have.
No, it is. And it's funny you bring up a trade example like that. I've got a plumber that I've come to love, and I call his company all the time now. But when he first came to me a number of years ago, he showed up with an apprentice with him, and they went through their deal, and it was, a relatively fast fix. And then fast forward a year or two, I had something happen. I call, well, guess who shows up? It wasn't the owner, it was the apprentice guy. And now he's all, I know my stuff, I got to go in. And he had a guy, he had a guy with him. And I actually stopped him and talked to him about that. And he said, yeah, Mr. So-and-so, the owner, he said, that's what he does. He trained me, and now I'm training this guy. And, we're going to keep this thing going. And
Multiplicity, the movie, right? Copy
and
of
I'm
a
okay
copy
with
of a
that.
copy.
Yeah. And I'm okay with that, and the work was done efficiently and well, and it didn't, they weren't here a half a day tinkering around, banging stuff up. And, I think it's a great process.
Oh, that's awesome. This was a great discussion there, Doug. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I enjoyed it, Ben. Thank you for having me.
So leadership and management, it's two different things. Think about it. So thanks a lot, and hopefully we'll have you on again.
I'll be happy to do it.
Thanks for listening to the Focus on Customer Experience podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. For more information or to connect with Ben, check out Benjamin Del Grosso on LinkedIn, at Safe Drive Solutions on Instagram, or www.safedrivesolutions.ca online. We'll see you next time.